a boxcar. Like I say, you inspect it, you look it over, see if there's anything obviously wrong. And in this case here, it doesn't appear that there's anything obvious. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, the uncoupling pins are really bent up. Other than that, it appears to be all right. Let's get some of this other stuff out of the way for the moment. How does this show, George?
Pretty good.
Can you see the uncoupling pin?
I'm going to focus on that if I can. Hang on. Yep. Okay.
Okay. The uncoupling pin is bent up further than it normally would be. In our case here, we seldom use magnetic uncouplers. We usually use the 5 fat fingers or 2 fat fingers and pick it up and open it. But the car looks pretty good except for the uncoupling pins. Next thing to do is see if it's properly weighted. What? Oh, this is a nice little thing. To find out what your weight should be, measure the car's length. This car is 7 inches long. And the weight for that should be 4.5 ounces.
How did you come up with that, other than you looking on your scale?
Pardon?
How did you come up with that?
The NMRA has a recommended weight for length of cars.
Okay.
And I've just got it marked out and pre-calculated on my ruler here. So all I have to do is put a car on the track, match up the end to the beginning of the ruler, see where the other end is, and read off the...
How did you come up with that, though?
Come up with what?
With that, was it 4.5 ounces to, to 7 inches?
Well, actually, the formula is ounce and a half, I think, plus a half ounce per inch of length. I don't remember it offhand. I've got it marked out here according to the calculations.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a
1 ounce?
half ounce per inch plus 1.
Okay.
Okay, that's what.
Okay, then that figures out 1.5 ounces to 1 inch length.
Okay.
So. Okay, and this one here weighing 4.7 ounces.
It was really light.
No, it's over.
Oh, it's 4 point. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was over.
Just over, corner, which is really fine as far as...
Within tolerance.
Oh, definitely. You like to have them reasonably close. You don't want them seriously underweight. If you go seriously overweight, it just reduces the number of cars the train, the locomotive can pull. So,
Seriously underweight would be defined as what, 10, 20%?
probably, or some of these plastic cars can be as low as 2 ounces.
But the air on the heavy side is actually more desirable than the air on the lower side.
Well, let me put it this way. doing it, I would round up to the next weight I have. You know, if a certain number of weights is not enough, one more puts it slightly over, that's fine. Stay there. You don't have to go. Shaving the weights to get right on. So, okay. The other thing you want to look at is your truck mounting. I like to have the trucks, I like to have one truck so that it pivots but does not rock. And then the other truck, let that rock a little bit so that any track irregularities will not cause wheels to lift. And for no other reason than the habit I've gotten into, I usually have the one with the brake wheel rocking. It doesn't matter. All to your own foibles. Okay, the other thing is a couple of height and trip pin height. There's a couple of height gauges around. This is KD's. It does the knuckle height and the trip pin height simultaneously. Borrowing inch paper again. There, you get some contrast, George. This is the KD coupler height gauge. Item number 205, if I remember right. Something else if I don't. This one is from Micromark. It does the coupler height on one side and the trip pin height on the other. So you can use either one as suits your. I kind of like that one. Mostly because it's more definitive on whether the coupler is too high or too low. Here you have to look and see how it matches up with the coupler that's in the gauge. So, of course, this one with the I thought the trip pin was interfering there for a minute, but it's not. This one is slightly low. This one I can't really tell simply because the trip pin is getting in the way. So let's try the other gauge. Oh, it's low. Pretty obvious. George, can you get in to get a picture of that? Or if I tilt it up a little bit to get profile?
Hopefully we got it.
All right. Okay. On this car, the coupler is a little bit low. How do you fix it? There's a couple of different ways. Katie has a part which is basically a small flat washer. They come in two thicknesses. I think it's 10,000 and 15 thousandths. You can use some of them to raise the whole car, bringing the couplers up. The other alternative is to replace the center set couplers with an offset head coupler. Katie has them available both offset up and offset down, depending upon whether the coupler is too high or too low. And in combination with that, for certain applications, they have different shank lengths. which is not too commonly needed, but I know I've got a couple of F7s that I have to put a longer shank in the front coupler on the A unit to clear the cowcatcher.
Easels with the plows.
The plows.
Oh, that too, yeah. So that's basically what you do.
Now, if the coupler is too high, the only way to, to fix that is put an offset.
That would be the most likely way. The other way possibly would be to file a little bit off the top of the truck, the round area where the contacts the bolster.
Yeah.
But you've only got a limited amount of removal you can do there before you start getting interference. Either your wheel flanges start hitting the floor underneath, or in cases like that, the most effective method would be to use the underset coupler head.
Okay.
How is the easiest way, without having to go to a spec sheet, to find out what size wheels you would use on that if you were to change them to steel wheels? And how much of a difference would it make as far as the height or the lowness of the car?
Most freight cars have 33-inch wheels. Some of the heavy-duty ones
Not 36.
have 36s. So that's
What about the
primarily.
passenger cars?
Pardon me?
What about the passenger cars?
Those are bigger.
I'd have to guess, but I'd say 33 primarily.
So 33 for freight.
Yeah. Yeah, 33 is pretty universal for freight cars. With some of the newer ones, the stack cars, and some of them,
If they're in sets,
yeah.
the end trucks are usually 36s. The end units.
We started talking about couplers, and I was measuring coupler heights on this. Couplers are
Diameter.
low, and they're somewhat difficult to check because of the way the pin is bent.
Yeah, that's obvious.
But it's still full of pockets.
Did you check all those cars upstairs? Did you check all of them? Really?
There's a lot of them up there. That's what I thought we were doing.
Some of the brand new ones are overweight.
No more.
They seen them?
That's noticeable.
Yeah.
Very noticeable.
So now are you shaping that pin or just straightening it, or?
Essentially straightening it, lowering the end of it. The thing was rather, usually it's somewhat of about a quarter turn coming down from the head of the coupler. If it's too high, if you're using the Katy magnetic on couplers, if it's too high, they won't work. If it's too low, they'll snag on track work. So that's why.
Now, if you don't use the Katy magnetic decoupler, does it make any difference? Because, I mean...
If you know you're not going to use the Katy coupler,
Because I
you
always
could cut them off.
I have done it.
at the underside of the coupler head.
Okay.
But I don't usually do that on mine because I got one of those Rexon couplers.
Yep.
Just goes down between the cars, and that pulls the pins apart and uncouples it very nicely.
Because I always bend mine up because I'm afraid that it's going to get caught in the track.
Or just use your height gauge, and that'll put you pretty close to where you want to be.
But some of the track upstairs is just a touch high. And
So you can adjust it just a touch high. But you know, locomotives will have a separate coupler blocks which screws on, and that's primarily to insulate the coupler from the frame of the locomotive. One thing that happens there is, not so much nowadays, but older times, lots of times the chassis of the locomotive was directly connected to one of the rails. And if you coupled up two of them head to head or tail to tail, they would short the track through the couplers from one locomotive to the other. In most cases nowadays, the wheel pickups go up to the board on top of the chassis, and the chassis itself, in most cases, is electrically neutral. And this sort of worked its way in as the requirements of DCC dictated. Because, you know, with DCC, you have to make sure both of your motor brushes are isolated from the rails. So, there are a few locomotives around. I've got a couple of them myself. Atlas S2s and S4s are a good example of that. They have the motor grounded to the chassis and the chassis connected to one of the rails. So you got to play some funny games there. Nowadays, most locomotives in particular have basically an insulated chassis, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, what else?
Is that thing set now for the right coupler height?
No, it's not set for the right coupler height because we may have to.
they're all the various
Let's see what we
collections.
got here.
We got
Yeah.
quite an extensive collection up there.
But if Jerry ain't got it, he can order it.
Yeah.
Another place I'll probably have to reintroduce myself.
Jerry?
Jerry,
Nice pizza shop next door. We were down there the other day.
oh, was that new?
You know, but it's good pizza.
Oh, okay.
See, that truck's nice and tight, doesn't rock a bit. Of course, it doesn't swivel either. But
Minor problem.
Only meant for straight track.
no turn.
Yeah, don't turn.
I was thinking background music we can use working on the railroad.
But that's one thing you can do. You can take it down tight and then back it off just enough so it swivels freely.
That's the one thing I do find with those, though, Jack. They tend to restrict the swiveling of the coupler, of the truck.
What's that?
The little washers. And I've had trouble with some of the, they fit very tightly over the little, I don't know what you want to call it,
Boss.
little shoulder there.
Oh, I know what you mean now.
If you squashed them, yes.
Yeah.
That's one of the things. Athearn is famous for that. The boss that the truck swivels around is higher than the thickness of the top of the truck.
Right.
So if you take it down tight, you compress the boss and it spreads out. Usually what I do is I'll file that down until it's basically flush with the, when you mount the truck,
Right.
it doesn't extend up into the truck area.
Oh.
That way there, even if you do tighten it down snug, it's not going to cause the thing to deform. Of course, if you end up having to put spaces on, then it's down a little further, but usually at that point there, it's not too big a deal. And Atherns in general have been pretty it still needs more. Interesting.
So how much did you add?
I put a 15,000th on the red ones.
A lot of times, too, if that thing gets crushed where the bolster is, what I've done is 256 screws, the head is just about the right diameter for the truck. It keeps the truck in the center without the bolster even on there.
A lot of times I'll take and use, rather than the self-threading screws that many of them come with, I'll replace it with a 256 machine screw.
Yeah.
And lots of times I'll tap the thing too, so you,
Hey, Jack, what's the reasoning you behind your one truck? You're making it just swivel, and the other truck, swivel and a little bit of wobble to it.
if you have too much, if your trucks will wobble, your cars will wiggle back and forth a lot.
Okay, so just add one swivel.
Yeah, if you have one that's solid,
Yeah.
your car will tend to follow and look pretty decent rolling along. And yet, the other one being able to rock a little bit, if there are any track irregularities that show up, it can wiggle to work them out without, if the thing was solid, no rocking at both ends, you could be in a situation if the track took a dip or something like that, you'd lift your flanges above the railhead and you end up with derailments.
And if your car wobbles when it's going down, that means there's wobble in both trucks.
Usually, yeah.
Because I got a passenger train that does that.
Yeah. Some are easier than others to remove the wobble, but you look at it and you see what has to be done. And
You're basically making that car run a three-point pressure by allowing one to wobble. Is that correct?
yeah, that's what it works out to be. Your two wheels at one end and your bolster pivot at the other end.
Pivot point.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Okay, so we raised this end by 15,000. It's still not enough. Let's see how bad it looks to be.
Jack, if the other end is also low, if you don't raise it, that will affect the end that you're working on right now.
It will, but in this case here, if we're raising end A, if NB is not adjusted, it's actually going to it's going to be lower than end A being raised and accentuate the coupler height raise by the distance past the bolster pivot point. It's like a lever on the pivoting on the front axles.
On that wobbling too on cars and passenger cars would be the same thing. You have poor quality wheels. The center is off, so they're wobbling. The wheels themselves are wobbling.
Oh yeah, if you've got an off-center wheel, nothing you can do except replace the wheel, or the wheel set in this case. And the only way you can, there's no real good way of measuring wheels off center. Take care, Bill. There's no real good way of measuring off center wheels except to visually monitor them as they go.
You ever use that little reamer to ream out the trucks?
I haven't yet. I don't have one. I've heard other people with good results from them. I've not used it yet. I sort of like to try it one of these days, but
What do they run at? What, $10 or something?
$9. They work great.
Because I have,
I like the old packet ads. That's the man who's used one.
because these, I've used them on these ready to run cars, and they aren't ready to run. You can get some credit out of there.
Oh yeah.
You can see a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, Reebok sells that.
And then they build up grime or something in there.
You just got to make sure you don't overdo it, because you can ream too far, and then the axle actually just goes right by the axle.
Oh,
If you do it too much, yes.
okay.
You don't sit there and say a little good, harder is more. So you sit there, you just take it with the pressure when you put it in your truck. You don't sit there and hold both sides and ream it more, so it digs it deeper, and
I put
so it's not
mine in
actually centered. And it,
Yeah, I put mine in
That's the man who's been there, right?
I had to replace a set of trucks because I did it, so I learned my lesson.
That's what they say.
But they do look good, and what I do understand is they do come in different sizes.
They do?
Yes, Jerry only has one standard size because there are different ends to the axle. Some come to a point, some come very rounded, and there are two different types.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Because if you look at some of the older ones, they have a rounded edge at the top. They're not as they don't come to a nice tapered point like they do now. There's a rounded edge, and they do have a reamer just for those older cars.
I know some of my old vinyl plastic wheels have axles like that.
I have a set of old passenger cars that have that, and when I use this new one on them, it actually tightened them up more because you're trying to put this rounded thing in this nice tapered angle, and it just jammed them in. So I ended up having to just take a drill that had a rounded edge, and I just cut it a little rounded again, and it works fine. But that's how I found out there was another one out there that you can buy for the older cars.
And of course, you have the trucks that have the roller bearing end caps that actually go through the side of the truck frame. So
Now those you don't want to do, obviously, because you ruin the roller bearing.
It's close enough. It's just touching the bottom of the bottom of the gauge.
That's all right. You get the car on the way out.
You say you've got enough play and comfort, and that should suffice.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If you have the rails that are doing anything differently to uncouple it, that match.
Now what that means is we put two in the other end and see
Are
what
you sure, Jack?
What?
Are you sure that the other end might not? I've had that happen with cars. The other end is off.
Well,
Don't ask me why. I mean, can be proven wrong.
generally,
Which driveway?
Here's your combo.
Use the other one.
Yeah, the scale,
So
the
you
scale
think it's
car
the
would
same on the other side?
$6,000.
yeah.
Yeah, but that's a by 16.
That's what I just did.
No, but that is the outside by 16.
There's a lot of them. 2,250.
top of the hill.
You're not going to worry about it, you're right. I'm not going to worry about that.
It was like, Podzilla.
Was it off, Jack?
Yep.
Okay. No, I mean, My only thing is that sometimes you'll find that one end will not match the other end. And it is, working.
Get another one, Pastor Don.
Yeah. I thought I had two. But yes, I do.
Mary's got some more.
Our local suppliers at hand.
Actually, we do have some there in that
Do they?
case there. Yeah, we have some couplers and those two sizes of washers. We have a committee for them.
Yeah, except we won't.
Yeah, did they mail you nice big check? They didn't send you $1 million in there? Won't do it black. What up? You know why?
The other thing to remember when you're screwing trucks on and off, sorry to disappoint you, Tim.
I was waiting for it, John.
When you're removing and reattaching trucks with screws, you should always attempt to start the screw into the previously run thread. If you force it and rethread the thing every time, pretty soon you're not going to have enough meat there to do it at all.
You end up with a flat tube that holds nothing.
Amen.
Get a bigger screw. For the need for a larger screw.
That's what you need. The problem is, when you do that, let's look at it this way. And it's still low, but it's not as bad as it was. Yeah, that's a lot better.
It goes up and down.
Oh, well, it does one of these.
Yeah,
You're right. You're going to leave somebody behind.
The other thing to inspect when you're looking at these things is make sure that the little spring for the knuckle is in place. Not perfect. One end, the B end is, I'm sorry, the A end is a little bit low still.